The shuttle broke through the clouds of the Velkara throne world like a small stone dropping into a still lake. It was a tiny thing, that shuttle, barely the size of a transport truck compared to the massive crystalline towers that rose from the planet's surface like the fingers of a buried giant. The towers caught the light of the twin suns and split it into 1,000 colors. It was beautiful, the kind of beautiful that was also meant to make visitors feel small. That was the point. Commander Alara Voss sat in the front seat of the shuttle and looked out the window without blinking. She had seen beautiful things before. She had also seen them burn. Beauty did not impress her the way it once had. She was 41 years old. Her dark hair was pulled back tight. There was a scar that ran from her left ear down to her jaw, a gift from the third Velkara border skirmish 2 years ago. She had not bothered to have it removed. The Earth Council had suggested she might want to look more diplomatic. She had looked at the council member who said that for a long moment and then said nothing. The scar stayed. Behind her, the 2 junior diplomats from Earth's Foreign Relations Division were quietly panicking. She could hear it in their breathing. Short, shallow, fast. She did not turn around. They would either settle down or they wouldn't. She couldn't carry them through this. The shuttle landed on a wide platform of black stone, smooth as glass. A row of Velkara guards stood waiting. They were tall. The shortest among them was easily 7 feet. Their skin was a deep silver blue, and their eyes were large, golden, unblinking. They wore armor made from some kind of dark material that shifted color slightly as they moved. They held long staff weapons that hummed with quiet energy. They looked at the shuttle the way a man might look at a stray cat that had wandered into his garden. Alara was the first one off the shuttle. She stepped onto the black stone platform, felt the heavier gravity of the planet settle onto her shoulders like a thick blanket and straightened her back against it. She wore a simple dark uniform. No medals, no decorations. The Earth Council had wanted her to wear the full dress uniform with every ribbon and honor she had earned. She had declined. She wasn't here to show them what she had done. She was here to show them who she was. A Velkara official stepped forward. He was taller than the guards and wore long silver robes that touched the floor. He looked down at Alara the way someone looks down at something they are not sure they should touch. "You are the human representative," he said. His translator device made his voice flat, but the tone underneath was still clear. It was not a question. It was barely even an acknowledgement. "Commander Alara Voss," she said, "representative of Earth, here on behalf of humanity." The official said nothing for a moment. He looked at her the way someone looks at a piece of furniture that has been placed in the wrong room. Then he turned and began walking toward the entrance of the main tower. "You will follow," he said. She followed. The inside of the tower was even more impressive than the outside. The ceilings were so high that the tops were lost in shadow. The walls were made of the same crystal as the exterior, and light moved through them slowly like water. The floors were polished black stone. The whole place was quiet in a heavy, deliberate way, the kind of quiet that told you, without words, that noise was not welcome here. They were led down long corridors and through wide archways until they entered the throne chamber. It was enormous. Rows of Velkara courtiers lined the sides of the chamber in tiered stands, hundreds of them, silver blue and golden-eyed, all dressed in robes of various dark colors. They watched Alara and her small group walk in with an expression that was hard to read. It wasn't quite contempt. It was something quieter than contempt. It was the look of people watching something that didn't quite belong. At the far end of the chamber, on a throne carved from a single piece of black crystal, sat Queen Sarathval. She was not the tallest Velkara in the room. She did not have the most elaborate clothing, but there was something about the way she sat, completely still, completely relaxed, completely certain, that made it clear she was the most powerful thing in the room, maybe on the planet. She had ruled the Velkara Empire for 300 years. She had watched 47 species bend the knee to her throne. She wore her authority the way other people wear skin. It was simply part of her. Her golden eyes moved to Alara as soon as she entered the chamber. They stayed there. Alara walked the full length of the chamber without looking away from those eyes. Her footsteps echoed on the stone floor. Behind her, she could hear one of the junior diplomats stumble slightly. She kept walking. She stopped at the base of the throne steps. She did not bow. She had been told not to. The Earth Council had spent 3 weeks debating whether a small bow might be appropriate. The final decision had been no. Bowing was for species that had already accepted a lower position. Earth had not. The Queen looked at her for a long moment. Then she spoke. Her voice was low and smooth and carried across the entire chamber without effort. "So," she said, "these are the humans." A quiet ripple of sound moved through the courtiers. Not quite laughter, something near it. The Queen continued, "You are a young species, loud, violent. You have been defeated at our borders 3 times in the last decade." She paused. "And yet here you are, asking to exist within our space as though you have earned that right." Alara said nothing. She waited. "Every species that wishes to exist under Velkara protection must prove themselves worthy," the Queen said. "This is not cruelty. This is order. The weak do not survive in this galaxy, and we will not carry species who cannot carry themselves." She leaned forward slightly, just enough that the light caught her golden eyes. "You will undergo the rite of worthiness. 3 trials. If you succeed, your kind will be recognized. If you fail, your ships will be turned back at every border we control, and you will return to that small, warm rock you came from and stay there." She leaned back again. "Earn your place, warrior, or go home." The chamber was perfectly silent. Alara held the Queen's gaze for a moment that stretched 3 seconds longer than anyone in the room expected. Then, slowly, the corner of her mouth moved. It wasn't a smile exactly. It was something quieter than a smile. It was the expression of someone who had just been handed exactly what they came for. The courtiers noticed. A murmur moved through the chamber like wind through tall grass. Nobody smiled at the Queen's decree. In 300 years, not one species champion had ever smiled. Queen Sarethville said nothing, but her eyes stayed on Alara long after the official had stepped forward to begin explaining the terms of the trials, long after the junior diplomats behind Alara had started breathing again. She watched the small human woman with the scar on her jaw, and for the first time in a very long time, she felt something unfamiliar stir in the back of her ancient, calculating mind. Curiosity. They took her underground. The official in the silver robes walked ahead without speaking, and Alara followed him through a long descending corridor that went deep beneath the throne tower. The walls here were no longer crystal. They were raw stone, carved smooth but undecorated. Functional. The air grew heavier as they descended, and the lighting shifted from the warm, ambient glow of the upper levels to a colder, harder blue-white that came from strips embedded in the ceiling. The 2 junior diplomats had been left behind in a waiting room near the shuttle platform. This part was hers alone. That had been made clear from the beginning. The official stopped in front of a large sealed door made of dark metal. He turned to face her. "The trial of endurance has 7 chambers," he said. "Each chamber presents a different physical condition: gravity, temperature, atmosphere, pressure, sensory stress. You will move through them in order. There are no weapons. There are no tools. You will carry only what you have." He paused. "The trial ends when you exit the 7th chamber or when you cannot continue." "And if I want to stop early?" Alara asked. The official looked at her with something close to pity. "You will say the word yield. The chamber will open. You will be escorted back to the surface." He said it slowly, as if she might not understand. "Most champions choose this option before the 4th chamber." Alara nodded once. The door opened. The first chamber felt like walking into a wall. The gravity inside hit her immediately, twice the pull of Earth's standard. And her body responded the way a body does when something twice its weight is suddenly dropped onto it. Her knees bent, her spine compressed, Her vision swam for a moment. She planted her feet, breathed slowly, and let her body adjust. She had trained in heavy gravity suits. Not often, not enough that this was easy, but enough that she knew what her body was doing and how to work with it instead of against it. She crossed the first chamber in a slow, deliberate walk. By the time she reached the door on the far side, her legs were burning. She pushed through it anyway. The second chamber was cold. Not the cold of a bad winter. The cold of a place that had never been warm. The air hit her face like a blade, and the temperature reading on the small gauge built into her uniform sleeve dropped fast. She folded her arms close against her chest and moved, fast enough to generate some heat, slow enough not to exhaust herself. She kept her breathing controlled, taking in small amounts of the freezing air rather than big gasps that would cool her lungs too quickly. She had learned that in survival training. She had thought it was excessive at the time. She thought about her training instructor now and silently apologized to him. The third and fourth chambers combined reduced gravity with thin oxygen, the kind of conditions found at extreme altitude, and her head started to ache behind her eyes by the time she pushed through the third chamber door. Inside the fourth, the oxygen thinned further. Dark spots floated at the edges of her vision. She counted her steps, 1 through 10, then start again. It gave her brain something to hold onto when the dizziness tried to pull it sideways. She didn't know the Velkara observers were watching with growing silence until later. She didn't know that after the second chamber, Queen Sarathval had stood up from her private viewing seat and walked to the glass. She didn't know any of that. She was too busy counting steps. The fifth chamber was the loudest thing she had ever experienced. Sound used as a weapon, layered frequencies that hit the inner ear and made the world spin. It was designed to cause physical pain and break concentration. She pressed both palms flat against the sides of her head, not to block the sound, but to give her skin something to feel other than the noise, something solid, something real. She walked in a straight line. The door was directly ahead. She kept her eyes on it. She walked. The sixth chamber was pressure. Heavy, deep, crushing pressure on every surface of her body, the kind felt at extreme ocean depth. Her joints ached. Her ears rang with a high whine that had nothing to do with sound. She moved through it hunched, one step at a time, and when she reached the far door she had to use both hands and every remaining bit of strength in her arms to push it open, because the pressure made it feel like pushing a vehicle uphill. She stood in the space between the sixth and seventh chambers and breathed. Just breathed. In, hold, out, slow. Her legs felt like they belonged to someone else. Her hands were shaking. There was a dull roaring in her head that she was fairly sure was not going to go away for a day or two. She was tired in the deep, structural way, not the kind of tired that sleep fixes easily, but the kind that goes into the bones. She pushed open the door to the seventh chamber. The seventh was all of it together, reduced versions of each condition layered simultaneously, a combination designed so that the body had no single thing to fight and no single thing to adjust to. It was the one designed to catch the people who had made it through the individual chambers by relying on a specific technique or adaptation. This one demanded everything at once. She moved through it the way she had learned to move through the worst moments of her life. She stopped trying to solve it. She stopped trying to fight it. She simply moved forward slowly and steadily, the way someone walks through deep mud, not elegantly, not efficiently, but continuously. One foot in front of the other, then again. When she came out the other side, she dropped to one knee on the stone floor of the corridor beyond. Her breath came in ragged pulls. Her vision was gray at the edges. Every muscle in her body was reporting something she didn't want to hear. She breathed for 30 seconds, maybe 40. Then she put one foot flat on the floor, pushed, and stood back up. She straightened her uniform with both hands, slowly, carefully, like it mattered. When she looked up, she saw the official standing at the end of the corridor. He was staring at her. His golden eyes were wider than she had seen them before. Behind him, through a high observation window set into the corridor wall, she could see a row of Velkara in court robes standing in complete stillness, looking down at her. Among them at the center was the queen. Sarathville stood with both hands at her sides and her golden eyes fixed on the small, shaking, upright human below her. Her expression was unreadable. She had not moved from the glass. The official turned to the queen and said something in low Velkara, too quiet for the translator to catch. Sarathville said nothing for a long moment. Then, quietly, almost to herself, she spoke 4 words. "What are these creatures?" It was not a question. It had started as one, and somewhere in the middle it had stopped being one. By the time it left her mouth, it was something else entirely. Something that sounded just slightly like wonder. They gave her 1 hour to rest before the second trial. She was brought to a small stone room below the arena level. There was a flat surface to lie on and a container of water. She drank half the water slowly, ate the small block of nutrient paste she had kept in her uniform pocket since leaving the shuttle, and lay flat on her back with one arm over her eyes. She did not sleep. She didn't have enough time to sleep properly, and half sleep was worse than no sleep before something hard. She simply lay still and let her body do whatever it could do in 60 minutes. Her hands had stopped shaking by the time the official came back to collect her. The second trial was held in a different chamber than the first. This one was above ground, in a separate low building a short walk from the main tower. The outside of the building was plain, nothing carved into the stone, no decoration at all. She noticed that. Plain buildings on this world meant the people inside them didn't want you thinking too much about what happened inside. The official stopped her at the door. "The trial of mind," he said. "You will enter the chamber and sit in the central seat. A connection will be made between the chamber's systems and your mind. What you experience inside the simulation will feel completely real. Pain, cold, heat, impact, all of it will be as real to your body as anything you have felt today." He paused. "The trial ends when you accept what the simulation shows you. Most do not reach acceptance. Most ask to leave." "And how do I signal that I want to leave?" she asked. "You will say yield as before, or you will simply stop functioning under the stress. The system will detect that also." She nodded and went in. The chamber was small and round. The seat at the center was simple, just a slightly curved surface with 2 flat armrests. She sat down. The room dimmed. She felt something, not quite a touch, more like a pressure, settle at the back of her skull, not painful, just present, like a hand placed very gently on the back of her head. Then the room was gone. She was back on Kepler Station. She knew it immediately. The smell hit her first. Metal and recycled air and something burnt, always something slightly burnt on Kepler Station. The ventilation system had never worked right on the lower decks. She was in Corridor 7, the long one that ran between the barracks and the operations bay. The emergency lighting was on, red, which meant. She heard the explosion before she felt it. The floor moved. Then the sound started. Voices. Shouting. Then a sound she had heard in her nightmares for 6 years. The particular sound of a hull breach, that deep groaning tear followed by the roar of air being pulled fast in a direction it was never supposed to go. She was running before she had made the decision to run. The simulation was exact. Every detail was correct. The scorch marks on the wall of Corridor 9 exactly where she remembered them. The emergency hatch at Section D that always stuck and needed 2 hands and a shoulder to open. The faces. The faces were the hard part. Sergeant Demi Acaffer was the first one she saw. Demi was 26 in this memory. She was trying to seal a breach panel and the panel wasn't responding. Alara remembered this. She remembered running to help. She remembered that they got it halfway sealed before the secondary explosion took out the bulkhead behind them and Demi. The simulation showed her everything that happened next. She stood in Corridor 9 and watched it again. All of it. Her hands were shaking the same way they had shaken the first time 6 years ago. Her chest was tight. The guilt was there, the specific, heavy guilt of someone who survived something that others did not, and it sat in her chest exactly where it always sat, that spot just below the sternum that never fully stopped aching. The simulation moved her forward. More of it. The whole night on Kepler Station, playing out in real time every decision, every moment where she had turned left instead of right, where she had stayed instead of moved, where she had moved instead of stayed. 7 dead by the end of it. 7 people she had known by name, by voice, by the specific way they took their coffee. She stood in the middle of it and felt all of it. The Velkara psychic architects who monitored the simulation from their station outside the chamber watched her biometric readings with great attention. Heart rate elevated but controlled. Cortisol high. Brainwave patterns indicating extreme emotional activation. Everything looked the way it looked when a subject was about to break. They waited for the break. It didn't come. What happened instead was something none of them had a category for in their monitoring logs. The subject began to speak. Alara started narrating out loud, not to anyone in the simulation, not to the people in her memory, to herself. In a quiet, steady voice, she began describing what she was seeing and what she was feeling, plainly and without decoration. This is Corridor 9. This is the night I lost 7 people under my command. This is Demi. I think about Demi every week. I have thought about Demi every week for 6 years. I have gone over every decision I made that night approximately 400 times. A pause. I am still going over them. I don't think I will ever stop. One of the psychic architects removed her monitoring headset. She could not explain why. She simply needed to stop hearing it. The simulation threw new things at her. Deeper fears, darker possibilities, things that hadn't happened but could have. Faces of people still alive shown to her dead. She walked through all of it still talking, still narrating, her voice sometimes steady and sometimes not, but always continuing. After 40 minutes, the simulation simply ran out of useful material. It had given her everything it had. She had not asked to leave. She had not stopped functioning. She had just kept walking through it and talking at it and refusing, in the simple and complete way she refused most things, to be finished by it. The connection broke. The room came back. The lights returned to their normal cold blue-white. Alara sat in the chair for a moment. Then she put her face in both hands. She cried, not loudly, not dramatically. She cried the way someone cries when they are very tired and something they have been carrying for a long time becomes briefly too heavy. Small, quiet, private. 3 minutes. Then she lifted her face, wiped it with the back of her hand, and looked toward the chamber door. "What is the third trial?" she said. Outside the chamber, through the monitoring glass, Queen Sarathval stood completely still. She had been standing since the 6th minute of the simulation. Her high advisor had said something to her at the 20-minute mark. She had not responded. She was still watching when Alara wiped her face and asked about the third trial. Sarathval turned to her advisor very slowly. "They do not know how to give up," he said quietly. It was not quite a question. The queen said nothing for a long time. "No," she said finally, "I don't think they do." The proving fields were open to the sky. After 2 trials underground, the sudden openness of the arena felt almost strange. The space was wide and flat, surfaced with a dark compressed material that had some give to it, like packed earth. The twin suns were lower now, past midday, and the light came in at an angle that turned everything amber and deep gold. Around the perimeter of the arena, tiered stands rose in a wide circle, and they were full. Not just the court this time. Word had spread through the tower and the surrounding grounds in the way that remarkable things always spread, fast and without effort. Velkara, who had no official reason to be present, had found reasons anyway. The stands were packed in a way the official who led Alara out of the preparation corridor seemed faintly surprised by. He said nothing about it. Alara stood at one end of the arena and looked across it. Warlord Draxon stood at the other. He was large in the way that certain things are large, not just in their measurements but in their presence, in the way the space around them seems smaller just because they are in it. He stood 2.5 meters tall. His natural armor, the dense bone-like plating that Velkara warriors developed over decades of combat, covered his shoulders, forearms, and the ridge of his spine. He had 4 arms, the upper pair longer and heavier than the lower, all 4 currently relaxed at his sides. His golden eyes were calm. He had done this before many times. He looked at Alara the way a mountain looks at weather, patient, unchanging. He had ended 11 consecutive trial of war bouts in under 2 minutes. His shortest was 43 seconds. The species champion of the Erath had not even had time to raise their limbs before it was over. The crowd was quiet when Alara walked out onto the field. Not respectful quiet, more the quiet of people who are watching something they expect to end quickly and don't want to miss the moment. Some of them, she noticed, were making small movements with their hands, gestures to each other, probably commentary, possibly bets. She rolled her neck twice, shook out both hands, and looked at Draxon across the field. He looked back. The signal was given, a single sharp tone from somewhere in the stands. Draxon moved immediately. He covered half the field in the time it took Alara to set her feet, and when his first strike came, it was from his upper right arm with the kind of speed that her eyes clocked but her body could only partially respond to. She got her left forearm up in a partial block. The impact hit her arm and transferred through her shoulder and rocked her sideways 3 steps. Her left arm went temporarily numb from elbow to wrist. She moved back and to the right, created distance. Her arm was already starting to come back online. She flexed her fingers, they worked. Good. He came again. This time lower, the upper arms high and wide, the lower arms driving toward her center. She read the lower arms late but correctly, dropped her hips, let the strike graze her side rather than land clean, and used her own movement and his forward momentum to redirect herself out of his path. It wasn't elegant. She ended up on one knee on the ground, but she was out of his reach and moving again before he had fully turned. She circled, she watched. This was the part that the Velkara watching from the stands didn't understand yet. She wasn't trying to hurt him. She couldn't hurt him, not in any meaningful way, not with the mass difference between them and the protection of his natural armor. She knew that. She had known that from the moment she saw him, so she wasn't trying to end the fight. She was trying to understand it. His upper arms initiated. Every single time. They set the direction and committed the power. His lower arms followed and executed. The lower pair was faster in isolation, but only operated in support of whatever the upper pair decided. They were reactive, not creative. His left lower arm overextended on follow-through. She had seen it twice now. When his upper right drove forward and the lower left came across to finish, it came just slightly too far. The joint wasn't fully protected in that position. Not a weakness exactly, more a narrow window. The problem was getting to that window, without being put into the ground first. He hit her twice more in the next 40 seconds. The first caught her across the back and put her flat on the arena surface. She got back up. The second clipped her jaw and made the world tilt sideways for a moment and filled her mouth with the copper taste of blood. She spat, set her feet again, and kept moving. The crowd was still quiet, but it was a different quiet now. It had changed somewhere in the last minute. The weight of it had changed. She drew him into a rush. Let him commit fully to the upper right lower left combination she had been watching. At the last possible moment she drove forward rather than away, inside the arc of his upper arm, too close for his strike to land clean. His lower left came across and she was already rotating into it. Taking it on the shoulder instead of the torso, letting the impact spin her, and using that spin to bring her full weight behind both her hands, driving into the back of his exposed lower left, joint at the peak of its overextension. The joint gave, not broke, but gave, bent further than it wanted to go. Draxon's arm dropped. He turned, faster than she expected, and she took a hit across her ribs from his upper left that lifted her off the ground and put her down hard. She lay flat for 2 seconds, and the world was mostly darkness and ringing. She rolled, she got her hands under her, she pushed. She stood up. Her vision was gray at the outer edges. At least 2 ribs were complaining loudly. Her shoulder felt like it was being slowly pulled apart. She raised her hands again and faced him. His lower left arm hung at a wrong angle. He looked at it briefly. Then he looked at her. She charged him. Not with power, with intention. She drove low under his reach, found the compromised side, locked both her arms around his lower left limb, planted her feet, dropped her weight, and pulled. She used her legs, her back, her entire body in one continuous committed motion, the kind of technique that exists in half a dozen different human combat traditions, and is effective in all of them precisely because it doesn't rely on the strength of the person doing it. It relies on leverage. Draxon went down. He hit the arena floor with a sound that shook the ground. He lay still for 1 second, 2, 3. The crowd made no sound. He raised one massive fist slowly from the ground, not to push himself up. He raised it toward Alara and held it there, knuckles toward the sky. She stood over him, breathing hard, bleeding from her lip, holding her ribs with one arm, and looked at that raised fist for a moment. Then she reached down and touched it with her own. From deep in Draxon's chest came a low, rumbling sound. It built slowly, and then she recognized it. Laughter. The translation matrix had only one word for it in every language it held, the same word in all of them. "Worthy," he said. The crowd broke. Not into cheers. The Velkara did not cheer the way humans cheered. What rose from the stands was something different. A sound she had no word for. Low and resonant and building, like the sound a very large engine makes when it finally catches. It was the sound of a species that had not been surprised in a very long time experiencing surprise. At the edge of the arena, Queen Sarathvil descended the steps from her viewing platform. Slowly, deliberately. She had not descended to an arena floor in 50 years. She walked to the edge of the field and stopped. She looked at Alara standing in the center of the proving grounds, battered and bloodied and upright. For 300 years she had given the decree, "Earn your place, warrior." 47 species had tried, some had done well, none had done this. She had no words ready. In 300 years she had never needed them. The Velkara physicians were thorough. They worked on Alara in a clean side room near the arena without speaking much, their long silver-blue fingers moving with the kind of practiced efficiency that came from treating warriors after the trials for centuries. 2 ribs were cracked, not broken. Her shoulder had been partially pulled from its socket and had gone back in on its own during the fight, which they seemed both surprised and mildly impressed by. The cuts on her face were sealed with a compound that felt cool and set fast. Her arm, the one that had gone numb from Draxon's first hit, had full feeling back. They had never treated a trial contestant before. The trials were not supposed to end with the contestant still standing. There was no protocol for this. They improvised. When they were done, she sat on the edge of the treatment surface and looked at her hands. The knuckles were swollen. The shaking from earlier in the day was gone, mostly. A small tremor remained in her left hand, the deep kind, the one that came from sustained physical stress and would go away in a day or 2 with sleep and food. She pressed her hands flat on her thighs and felt the surface under them. Solid. Real. She was still here. The official came for her an hour after the physicians finished. He said nothing as he led her through the corridors of the main tower and upward, past the levels she had seen before, to a floor near the top that she had not been taken to. The corridors here were narrower and quieter. The crystal walls still moved light slowly through them, but the light here was warmer, less cold blue, more like late afternoon. He stopped at a door and opened it. "The Queen will speak with you alone," he said. Alara walked in. The room was smaller than she expected for a queen. It was not a throne room. There was no throne. There were two chairs, both simple in design, and a wide window that looked out over the crystal towers of the city and the land beyond them, flat and dark green under the amber sky of late afternoon. The twin suns were near the horizon. Their combined light made the whole view look like something someone had painted rather than something real. Queen Sarathville was standing at the window when Alara entered. She turned. Without the throne, without the height of the raised platform, without the court arranged around her, she was still impressive. But she was also, for the first time, simply a person standing in a room. A very old person in some ways. A very powerful one, but a person. She looked at Alara for a moment. Then she gestured toward one of the chairs. Alara sat. The queen took the other chair, which she did slowly, with the slight deliberateness of someone who spent most of their time standing in formal settings and found sitting in casual ones somewhat novel. For a moment neither of them spoke. The city outside the window made no sound through the thick crystal. Then the queen said, "I have ruled for 300 years. "I know," Alara said. "In that time I have seen 47 species go through the rite of worthiness." She paused. Some were brave, some were strong, some had abilities that genuinely surprised us, but every one of them in the end reached a point where they stopped, where the decision to continue became too costly and they made the reasonable choice to accept the limit they had found. She folded her hands in her lap. "You did not do that." "No," Alara agreed. "Why?" It was a simple question, direct. The queen asked it the way she probably asked most things, clearly and without softening, with the expectation of a real answer. Alara was quiet for a moment. She was not performing the pause. She was actually thinking about it, about how to say something true in a way that would be understood by someone whose entire frame of reference was completely different from her own. "We come from a difficult place," she said finally. "Earth is not a gentle world. It tries in a lot of ways to be done with you. The weather, the animals, the diseases, other humans historically have been one of the biggest problems. For most of our history, we were not the most powerful thing in our own environment." She looked at her hands for a moment, then back at the queen. "So we developed something instead. We got very good at continuing past the point where continuing made sense. It's in us at a level we don't always think about consciously. We just don't stop, even when we probably should." The queen was quiet for a moment. "And if we had refused you," she said, "if we had closed our borders to your ships regardless of the trials, turned you back permanently, what would you have done?" Alara met the queen's golden eyes directly. "Found another way in," she said, "or built our own door." She said it without heat, without threat, simply as a statement of fact, the way someone describes what they would have for breakfast. It was the flatness of it that landed hardest. A threat delivered with anger can be weighed against the anger and often discounted. A fact delivered calmly has no such discount available. Sarathville looked at her for a long time. 300 years of ruling had given her an extraordinary ability to read people, to understand what lived beneath what they said, to identify performance and posturing, an honest statement. She had been doing it since before Alara's great-grandmother's grandmother was born. The human woman across from her was not performing. She was simply telling the truth. The queen rose from her chair. She rose slowly and stood to her full height, which was considerable, and she moved toward Alara with the same measured deliberateness that she moved everywhere. Alara rose also, not quickly, just stood, because sitting while the queen stood felt wrong in a way her instincts were clear about. Sarathville extended her hand. Palm up, open still. In Velkara culture, there were many gestures, bows of various depths for various ranks. Closed fist raised for a victor, open hand down for a supplicant, but palm up, open, extended toward another person, that was one gesture, one meaning. It had only ever been exchanged between equals, between two rulers of comparable standing, between two people who recognized in each other something that required no hierarchy to frame. In 300 years of her reign, Sarathval had extended that gesture 4 times. Elara looked at the open hand for a moment. Then she placed her own hand in it. The queen held it briefly, then released it. "Your place," Sarathval said quietly, "was never ours to give." The treaty was drawn up that evening by the queen's administration. It was not a long document. The Velkara did not make long documents for things they considered settled. Humanity was granted full standing within Velkara-controlled space, not as a protected species, not as a client civilization operating under Velkara permission, as peers, recognized, equal. It was the first such treaty in 200 years. Elara signed it with a pen she had brought from Earth, an old metal one her father had given her the day she shipped out for her first posting. She had carried it through 12 years of service and brought it here because she had thought, if this worked, she might want something of home present at the moment. She pressed the pen to the document and signed her name in full. Commander Elara Voss, Earth Humanity. The shuttle lifted off an hour after dark. The crystal towers of the city fell away below it, and then the planet itself fell away, growing smaller in the rear window until it was a point of reflected light among other points of reflected light. In the landing bay below, Warlord Draxon stood and watched the shuttle rise. His lower left arm was wrapped and bound and would need a week to heal properly. He watched the shuttle's light until it was too small to track. His second-in-command, a younger officer named Veldaris, stood beside him. She had watched the trials from the stands. She had not spoken since the end of the 3rd trial, which was unusual for her. "What do you think of them?" she asked finally. "The humans." Draxon was quiet for a long time, long enough that she thought he might not answer. "They lost 3 border skirmishes to us," he said slowly. 3. They should have stopped. Every model we used said they would stop." He paused. "They sent a diplomat instead." Veldaris waited. "The rest of the galaxy," Draxon said, "has no idea what is coming." He turned and walked back into the tower, his footsteps slow and even in the dark. Above the planet, the shuttle carrying Elara Voss accelerated toward the jump point that would take her home. She sat in the front seat with her eyes closed and her hands resting open on her knees. She was not sleeping. She was simply still, the way she had learned to be still in the spaces between hard things, while her body worked on healing and her mind worked on letting the day settle into the place where days eventually settled. There would be a great deal to do when she got back. Reports, briefings, questions from people who would not fully understand the answers. But that was later. Right now, for the first time in a long time, there was nothing required of her. The door was open. Humanity had walked through it on its own terms. She let out a long breath. Outside the window, the stars were everywhere, in every direction, unchanged and uncountable and entirely indifferent to what had just happened on the planet falling away behind her. She looked at them for a while. Then she smiled.